Let's begin this story by shedding some light on the dark past of William Devin Howell. Born March 27, 1970, in Hampton, Virginia, Howell had a happy early childhood, but by the age of 12, Howell's mother became sick, and this started spiraling him out of control. He was depressed and started drinking very young. He had multiple incarcerations for drunk driving and began picking up sex workers in the middle of the night. Even eventually, when he became married and had children, he continued hiring sex workers for their services. During this time, his view of women became pretty binary. He only saw good girls, like his mother, and bad girls, like these sex workers. And seemingly because of this, he crossed the line and jumped off into the deep end. In a gruesome spree that spanned 2003 to 2007, Howell claimed the lives of 7 people. He saw each of his victims as helpless, at risk, and vulnerable objects to be easily discarded. He never saw them as real human beings who were loved or cared for. Majority of his victims came from either addiction or street working, or both, which made him see them as worthless. And that, in particular, seems to be a pattern in the minds of serial killers who need a reason to go about their predatory ways. This was the same MO of another serial killer I recently told you about in the Choke and Stroke Killer episode of Samuel Little. Both of these men targeted women that they felt didn't matter to society. They wouldn't be missed because they probably didn't have a family that cared for them. In both cases, they were wrong. Melanie Ruth Camillini, a 29-year-old single mother of 2 from Seymour, was the Sick Ripper's first known victim. According to her family, she was known to have a substance abuse problem and would disappear sporadically. And so, when Melanie left to work on the streets one evening and did not return the next day, it didn't automatically raise any flags. However, instead of her usual disappearances, this time she'd met Howell and couldn't escape. Howell assaulted her multiple times over the course of 12 hours before strangling her and disposing of her body. Camillini is the only victim Howell claims to have struggled with murdering, and that was all due to her being a mother. His spree continued after Melanie to Marilyn Gonzalez, another mother with a drug problem who worked the streets. By his second killing, Howell knew when he picked up Gonzalez one evening that he would be killing her. Gonzalez disappeared on the evening of May 15th and was reported missing by her mother 13 days later. Like his first victim, Howell spent the first 12 hours with her, assaulting her in the back of his van until he was finished and disposed of her. After Gonzalez was Janice Roberts, a 44-year-old transgender woman. Roberts was last seen alive June 18, 2003, when she was seen getting to Howell's blue van in Wethersfield. Only a few days later, she was reported missing. Howell's routine was consistent with each victim. He'd abduct them in one way or the other, sexually assault them, and then dispose of their strangled body. Janice Roberts was different. When Howell realized she was transgender, he didn't continue with the assault and torture. He just ended her life right then and there. Nilsa Arizmendi was the 4th victim of the Sick Ripper. On July 31, 2003, Arizmendi was reported missing almost immediately. Her absence was of high concern for her family, and it helped launch the police into action even quicker. During the report, her sister said that she was a frequent drug abuser and sex worker in the Wethersfield area. And drug abusers normally fell off the radar when it came to the police following through with missing reports. But because of her family, that wasn't the case this time around. The murder of Arizmendi wasn't one he had planned on. Howell had no plans on killing her at first. It was only after her refusal to finish off a sexual favor did he impulsively decide to dispose of her. It was quick, and that gave her no room to potentially escape. And the police were all over this one. In his personal life, by this time, Howell's wife had petitioned to have full custody of their children. The entire legal debate launched Howell deeper into his own darkness, and at once he was more disassociated from his own moral compass. His killings became more frequent. During a 10-week frame in early fall, he took the lives of Mary Jane Menard, Diane Cusack, and Joyvelin Martinez, all of which happened in the back parking lot of a McDonald's located extremely close to his selected burial ground. All of his victims struggled for hours against this monster with no conscience. For years, these 7 disappearances were just that, disappearances. Yet the investigation into Howell's crimes finally reached a breakthrough in 2007 when police discovered the remains of 3 victims buried in a shallow grave behind the shopping plaza off the Berlin Turnpike. They found all the evidence they needed to put an end to what he was doing. A guy walking through the woods came across a skull. After a call to the police, the entire area was blocked off for investigation. At first, they only found the evidence of those 3 bodies, all unidentified Jane Does. In 2009, 2 New Britain detectives took 2 of the skulls, Jane Doe number 1 and Jane Doe number 2, to Quantico, Virginia. A specialized unit there used the remains to create models of what they believed the victims to look like. Once completed, the images were released in hopes of a family member or friend recognizing the faces and coming forward. From this, Jane Doe number 1 was identified as Diane Cusack. Soon after, Jane Doe number 2 was identified as Joyvelin Martinez. Police still believed Howell to have committed more murders than just those, so they continued to search in that area for more remains, but nothing came up. In a stroke of luck, Howell had been charged in the disappearance of Arizmendi due to the seizing of his van. Inside the van, they discovered DNA evidence linking him to her. Even though her body was yet to be found, he was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. And during this time, he confessed to an inmate, Jonathan Mills, about murdering Joyvelin Martinez and 6 others. He bragged about it, even going so far as drawing him a map of the shopping center and his burial grounds behind it, marking the exact places where the victims were buried. By now, it was 2014, and the burial sites of the remaining victims had been announced to the public. It only took a few weeks to positively identify each one. The police put their case together one step at a time, going through rounds of evidence, interviews, and timelines in order to secure the tightest case against William Devin Howell, the Sick Ripper. And in 2017, a judge sentenced him to 6 consecutive life sentences after he pleaded guilty to the murders of Cusack, Martinez, Menard, Gonzalez, Camellini, and Roberts. During his sentencing, he cried and apologized for his monstrous ways. He went on to beg for the death penalty, but his request was not honored. To this day, he is still incarcerated and expressed remorse for his own predicament, but no remorse for the victims and their families. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the podcast today. If you're new to 10-Minute Murder, welcome. Make yourself comfortable and make sure you subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. I assume it's wherever you're listening now. Hit subscribe, and that will make sure that you always find the podcast easily. Plus, it makes it simple to catch up on all the back episodes. And a reminder, if you only listen on YouTube, there are a bunch of episodes on YouTube, but so many more on podcast listening apps. All of the episodes are not posted there. So if you run out of episodes, you want to listen to more, go to Apple, Spotify, Audible, any of those places that have podcasts, and you'll find a whole bunch more. Connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media and see the pictures of what we talk about here in the podcast. Never gross and graphic stuff, though. If you like this episode, leave a rating and review any place that's possible, and your positive feedback is very much appreciated. Very quickly, let's read an email question submitted to me. If you'd like to, by the way, email me a question or anything at all, literally anything. Joe@10minutemurder.com is my email address. Hi, Joe. My friends and I stumbled on your podcast and have been hooked ever since. We were wondering if you'd do an episode about the bedsit murders. It's a very interesting case, and I think others would think so too. BTW, I'm one of the weirdos that used to ask what you like to drink while doing episodes. I haven't asked in a while, so, hey Joe, what are you drinking? You're the best. Lisa, Michelle, and Michelle in Wilmington. Thank you for the email, Lisa, Michelle, and Michelle in Wilmington. I don't know what state that's in, North Carolina, Delaware. Those are the two that I know about. There could be another one that I'm not sure, but I really appreciate you taking the time to email. And I've been sitting on this one for a little while because I've been taking time to look up bedsit murders and how to approach that story. And the good news is, coming next, the next episode should be that story. And I totally forgot that people used to ask what I was drinking while doing this podcast. And yeah, I think you are the original person that started asking me, and then more people asked me. But it was around the time when Coke Zero, that used to be my favorite drink, they switched to red cans. And I decided, in a very petty move on my part, not to buy the red cans. And then I realized that Diet Pepsi was usually like $1 cheaper. So I started buying Diet Pepsi. So that trend has continued to now. I'm not drinking that right now. Right this minute, I'm drinking a Canada Dry ginger ale, 0 sugar. And me and a friend of mine were talking a few days ago about ginger ale. I was talking about how much I like just drinking ginger ale. And he was like, that's not a drink. That's an ingredient. You put ginger ale in things. And maybe that's true, but it's fine on its own. There's no caffeine in there, and I do eventually need to go to sleep. Okay, that's going to do it. That is today's 10-minute murder episode. Thank you so much for listening.